Hey everyone, welcome back. In this week's episode, we're going to be diving straight into gesture figure drawing. This includes, of course, drawing the human body. Now, before you panic, don't worry. I'm going to be breaking down the body into simple ideas that is easy to consume. If you can understand the ideas and tools presented in this episode, drawing the body will be an easier task to tackle, depending on how much you practice. Let's get started. So, when I mentioned the human body, you might have pictured an image something like this. To be honest, this is the human body, a complex system comprising a multitude of intricate aspects. The biology, skeletal structure, muscular groups, joints, and much more. Looking at this can be very daunting and obviously difficult to learn. In fact, a lot of people make it their career to learn all about the human body, like doctors for example. They take years to study and learn specific parts or functions. But we are interested in the business of art and specializing on the idea of suggesting complex ideas through simple presentation. Here's a simple character I drew. We're going to call him Bob. Bob is basically our reference when it comes to body shape, size, and proportions. He is generic, which makes him easy to practice with. Now, I'm going to further break down Bob into simple shapes. I highlighted each part of his body into red shapes. Areas such as the hands, feet, and head will be simplified into triangles, circles, and ovals. Notice how a simple shape can summarize complicated structures. A stretched rectangle for the arms, an oval or circle for the head, triangles for the feet. It is not an accurate representation, but the suggestion is there. You can tell that Bob is a person. We're going to be focusing mainly on these green highlighted shapes, as they make up most of the body. I will be covering different aspects of the body in more detail in future videos. We're also going to be referencing back to Bob for this episode while we practice. However, I will say that there is a limitless amount of body types out there. Unlike Bob, they usually have exaggerated shapes and proportions. Character designers use different body types all the time to highlight their own characters to make them more distinguishable. For now, let's go back to Bob. Now that you have an idea of constructing the human body with simple shapes, I'll now talk about the biggest tool to help you start drawing, and that is the line of action. To me, the line of action is the longest line that can define any pose of a human body. It is the foundation that helps simplifies a pose and makes it easier to communicate on a general level. Going back to my first video, line helps indicate direction and movement, which can give more life to an otherwise static pose. It is the foundation that makes a pose easier to communicate on a general level. Going back to my first video, line helps indicate direction and movement, which can give more life to an otherwise static pose. Another big thing that I've noticed myself over the years was that the line of action can help indicate the weight distribution of the body in relation to a pose. For instance, if a body is standing and one leg is performing an upright kick, the other leg should be holding the weight of the upper body so the person doesn't topple over. The line of action can be summarized with a single line from the top of the head and usually on one side of the foot where the weight is. This is not always the case, as you can use multiple lines of action. I will show you some examples of figures where the line of action is drawn with a different color. Before we start, I think it's always good to have an objective for what you're about to draw. What we are trying to achieve is whether we can make a figure that expresses an emotion, an action, or perhaps even both. That's how I started off with all these drawings. Now let's practice. Using Bob as a reference, start by creating a line of action that summarizes the pose. If your drawing does not turn out good, that's okay. As I mentioned in a previous episode, when you make a mistake and you identify them, you are learning a lot in the process. Sometimes you might draw the arms long or the head too small. When you notice that, you will instinctively try not to make the same mistake twice. If drawing the figure is hard right off the bat, just practice drawing the line of action only. The great thing about doing that is that you can go back to it later on when you have more confidence to draw the full figure. Remember, the line of action is a foundation, a great starting point. Whatever works for you. When you're drawing a pose, try to add a story to it or make the character say something. Whenever you finish a drawing, step back and reflect on it. Ask yourself, does the character sell the pose that you had in your head? Does the pose look static? How many lines did you use to create the pose? Could you push it to make it more dramatic? Through reflection, you can identify how to improve on in future drawings. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. We wanted to keep things loose with our drawing and experiment more. In future episodes, we'll focus more on design as well as focusing on certain features of the body. Try these exercises, experiment and push yourself to make some cool and awesome character poses. See you next week. Bye bye.